The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled when Sarah Mitchell stepped onto the wooden platform in Deadwood, South Dakota Territory, her hand instinctively moving to the slight swell of her belly hidden beneath her traveling cloak. Knowing that in this rough mining town of 1876 her secret would soon become impossible to hide, and her choices were running out faster than the money sewn into her hem. The July sun beat down mercilessly on the muddy main street, and Sarah clutched her carpet bag tighter as she surveyed the ramshackle buildings that made up this frontier settlement. Men in dusty clothes and worn boots moved past her, their eyes lingering too long on a woman traveling alone. She had come here with a plan, thin as it was. Her cousin Margaret supposedly ran a boarding house on the edge of town, and Sarah had nowhere else to turn after what had happened back in Philadelphia. "You looking lost, miss?" The voice came from her left, deep and steady. Sarah turned to see a man in his mid-20s leaning against a post, a black Stetson shading eyes that were a startling shade of blue. He wore the typical garb of a ranch hand: denim trousers covered in trail dust, a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and boots that had seen plenty of miles. His face was sun-bronzed and honest, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it smiled often, though at the moment he regarded her with cautious concern. "I'm looking for Margaret O'Brien's boarding house," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her exhaustion. She had been traveling for nearly 2 weeks, and every bone in her body ached. The man straightened, pushing his hat back slightly. "That would be about 4 blocks down, past the Lucky Strike Saloon. Big white house, can't miss it. Though I have to warn you, Mrs. O'Brien passed on about 3 months back. Fever took her." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She swayed slightly, and the man moved quickly, steadying her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "Whoa there, you all right?" "I'm fine," Sarah lied, though her world was crumbling around her. Margaret had been her last hope, her only family who might have taken her in without questions. "Thank you for the information." She started to walk away, but her vision blurred at the edges. The heat, the journey, the devastating news, it all crashed over her at once. Her knees buckled. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy now," the cowboy said, his voice close to her ear. "When's the last time you ate?" Sarah couldn't remember. Yesterday? The day before? She had been rationing her small supply of bread and cheese, trying to make her meager funds last. "I'm all right," she repeated weakly. "You're not all right, and I'm not leaving you to collapse in the street." He adjusted his grip, supporting most of her weight. "My name is James Corrigan. I work at the Triple Creek Ranch just outside town, but my boss keeps a room at the Fairmont Hotel for business. It's respectable, and the restaurant serves decent food. Let me at least get you a meal." Sarah knew she should refuse. She didn't know this man, and accepting help from strangers could lead to complications she couldn't afford. But her body was betraying her, trembling with exhaustion and hunger, and the baby needed nourishment even if her pride didn't want to accept charity. "Just a meal," she heard herself say, "and then I'll figure out what to do next." James Corrigan guided her down the street with a gentleness that surprised her. The men she had known back east, educated men in fine suits, had never shown such natural courtesy. He helped her up the steps of the hotel, speaking quietly to the clerk, and within minutes she was seated at a table in the dining room with a glass of cool water in her hands. "Order whatever you want," James said, settling into the chair across from her. "The roast beef is good, and they make a fine potato soup." Sarah's hands shook as she lifted the water glass. Now that she was sitting down, she could feel just how close she had come to complete collapse. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, studying his face for signs of ulterior motives. "You don't know me." James removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "My mother always said that the measure of a man is what he does when nobody's watching. You needed help. I was there. It's not more complicated than that." The waitress came, and Sarah ordered the soup and bread, trying not to look too eager despite her growling stomach. James ordered coffee and apple pie, though she suspected he had already eaten and was just being polite by joining her. "So what brings you to Deadwood?" James asked after the waitress left. This isn't exactly a town where refined ladies usually end up. Sarah bristled slightly at the assumption, even though he was right. I was supposed to meet my cousin. I didn't know she had passed. I'm sorry, James said, and he sounded like he genuinely meant it. Were you too close? No, Sarah admitted. I hadn't seen her in nearly 10 years, but she was family, and I thought... She trailed off, not sure how to explain without revealing too much. James leaned back in his chair, studying her with those unsettling blue eyes. You thought she might give you a place to stay? It wasn't a question. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. I have some money. I'm not looking for charity. Didn't say you were? James's voice was mild. But Deadwood is a hard town for a woman alone. Most of the boarding houses cater to minors, and they're rough places, not safe. The food arrived, and Sarah had to force herself not to devour the soup too quickly. It was rich and hot and wonderful, and she felt strength seeping back into her limbs with each spoonful. James sipped his coffee and ate his pie slowly, not pressuring her to talk. After several minutes of silence, Sarah set down her spoon. I need to find work, she said, and a place to stay. Do you know of anything? James considered this. The general store sometimes needs help, and there's a school teacher who is looking for someone to assist with the younger children. But like I said, finding a safe place to stay is going to be the challenge. Sarah felt desperation clawing at her throat. She couldn't stay in this hotel, not with her limited funds. But she also couldn't risk ending up in some mining camp boarding house where her condition would be discovered and she would be thrown out or worse. There might be one option, James said slowly, as if thinking out loud. The Triple Creek Ranch where I work, the owner, Mr. Henderson, he's a widower with 3 young children. He's been looking for someone to help with the house and the kids. His sister was doing it, but she just got married and moved to Cheyenne. It's not easy work, but it comes with room and board, and it's safe. Henderson runs a tight ship, no drinking or carousing allowed on the property. Hope fluttered in Sarah's chest. Do you think he would consider hiring me? I could ask, James said, but I have to be honest with you. Henderson is particular about who he brings around his kids. He'd want to know something about you, where you come from, why you're here. Sarah felt the hope dying as quickly as it had sparked. She couldn't tell the truth, not the whole truth, but she also couldn't lie. Not if she wanted this job that might be her salvation. I came from Philadelphia, she said carefully. I was engaged to be married, but it didn't work out. My family, they weren't understanding. I thought starting fresh out west might give me opportunities I wouldn't have back home. It was mostly true. She had been engaged to Charles Whitmore, the son of her father's business partner. Charles had been charming and attentive during their courtship, always the gentleman in public. But after their engagement, he had changed. He became possessive, demanding. And one night, after too much whiskey at a party, he had forced himself on her, whispering that they were to be married anyway, so what did it matter? She had broken off the engagement the next day. Her parents had been horrified, not at Charles's actions, but at her refusal to go through with the wedding. The scandal would ruin them, they said. She was being dramatic, her mother insisted. These things happened between engaged couples. When Sarah realized she was pregnant a few weeks later, she knew she couldn't stay. Charles would demand marriage, would claim his rights as the father, and she would be trapped forever with a man who had violated her trust and her body. So she had taken what money she could and fled west, hoping to disappear into the vast frontier. James was watching her carefully, and Sarah wondered how much he could read in her face. That must have taken courage, he finally said, leaving everything you knew. Or desperation, Sarah replied softly. Sometimes they're the same thing. James drained his coffee cup. Look, I'm heading back to the ranch this afternoon. If you want, you can come with me and I'll introduce you to Henderson. No promises, but at least you'd have a chance to make your case. And if it doesn't work out, I'll bring you back to town before dark. Sarah wanted to ask why he was being so kind, what he expected in return. But looking at his open, honest face, she didn't sense any hidden agenda. Some people were just good, she supposed, though they had been rare in her experience. Thank you, she said. I would appreciate that very much. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself sitting beside James Corrigan in a wagon, rattling along a dusty road that led away from Deadwood and into the surrounding hills. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh sort of way. all rock and scrubby pine trees with mountains rising in the distance. The air smelled clean, so different from the coal smoke and industrial stench of Philadelphia. James handled the reins with easy confidence, pointing out landmarks as they went. "That's Elk Creek, runs year-round. And over there, that's where we found a grizzly last spring. Big fellow must have weighed 800 pounds. We left him alone, and he returned the favor." "Are there many bears?" Sarah asked, suddenly aware of how little she knew about this wild country. "Some. Mostly they avoid people if you avoid them. The real dangers are different out here. Flash floods, prairie fires, winter storms that come up fast, and people, of course. There are outlaws in these hills, claim jumpers and road agents. That's why Henderson runs the ranch like a small fortress. We look out for each other." The Triple Creek Ranch came into view as they crested a hill. It was larger than Sarah had expected, a sprawling collection of buildings arranged around a central yard. The main house was 2 stories, built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. There were several barns, a bunkhouse, corrals filled with horses, and other structures whose purposes she could only guess at. "Henderson built most of this himself," James said with evident pride. "Came out here in '68 with nothing but a wagon and a dream. Now he's got one of the best horse breeding operations in the territory." They pulled up to the main house, and James helped Sarah down from the wagon. Her legs were stiff from the ride, and she was acutely aware of how disheveled she must look after 2 weeks of travel. She tried to smooth her hair and straighten her dress, knowing that first impressions mattered. The front door opened and 3 children tumbled out, ranging in age from about 5 to maybe 10. They swarmed around James, chattering excitedly, calling him Uncle James, even though Sarah suspected they weren't actually related. "Is it true you saw a wolf pack on the North Range? Did you bring us anything from town? Papa said you might bring peppermint sticks." James laughed, producing 3 wrapped candies from his pocket like a magician. The children squealed with delight, and then seemed to notice Sarah for the first time. They fell silent, studying her with open curiosity. "Children, this is Miss Mitchell," James said. "She's come to talk to your father about possibly helping around the house. Can you go tell him we're here?" The oldest, a girl with brown braids, nodded seriously and ran back inside. The 2 younger boys lingered, staring at Sarah with wide eyes. "I'm Tommy," the braver one announced. "I'm 7. That's Ethan. He's 5, but he's scared of strangers." "I am not," Ethan protested, though he stayed half hidden behind his brother. Before Sarah could respond, a man emerged from the house. He was tall and lean, probably in his late 30s, with brown hair graying at the temples and a weathered face that spoke of years working outdoors. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone carrying a permanent weariness. "James," he said, nodding. Then his eyes moved to Sarah, cautious and assessing. "And this must be the lady you mentioned when you sent Lucy in." "Mr. Henderson, this is Miss Sarah Mitchell. She just arrived in Deadwood and is looking for work. I thought she might be a good fit for the position you've been trying to fill." Henderson studied Sarah for a long moment. She forced herself to meet his gaze steadily, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Come inside," Henderson finally said. "James, you can head back to work. Miss Mitchell and I will talk." The interior of the house was neat, but clearly lacking a woman's touch. The furniture was functional rather than decorative, and Sarah could see dust gathering in the corners. The kitchen was visible through an open doorway, dishes piled in the sink. Henderson gestured to a chair at the dining table and took one opposite her. Lucy hovered in the doorway, trying to look inconspicuous. "Lucy, go find your brothers," Henderson said gently. The girl sighed but obeyed, her footsteps echoing up the stairs. "James said you came from Philadelphia," Henderson began. "That's a long way." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "I was looking for a fresh start." "Seems like a lot of people come west for that reason," Henderson said. His tone wasn't unkind, but it was clear he wanted more information. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Mitchell. What kind of work have you done?" Sarah took a breath. "I helped manage my father's household back in Philadelphia. We had a large home and frequently entertained guests. I know how to cook, clean, keep accounts, and manage household staff. I also have experience with children. I helped care for my younger cousins when I was growing up. Why leave all that? Henderson's eyes were sharp. A capable woman from a good family back east would have options. Why come to a rough territory like Dakota? This was the question Sarah had been dreading. She met Henderson's gaze directly. My family wanted me to marry a man I didn't love. When I refused, they made it clear I was no longer welcome in their home. I wanted to go somewhere I could make my own way, on my own terms. It was true as far as it went. Henderson studied her face, and Sarah had the sense he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. That's difficult, he finally said. Family turning on you. I respect the courage it took to strike out on your own. He paused. But I need to be clear about what I'm looking for. My wife died 2 years ago in childbirth. Our 4th child died with her. The 3 you met, Lucy is 10, Tommy is 7, and Ethan just turned 5. They're good kids, but they need stability. They need someone who's going to stay, not run off at the first difficulty. I understand, Sarah said. The work is hard, Henderson continued. Cooking for the family, keeping the house, washing clothes, teaching the children their letters and numbers. I pay $30 a month plus room and board. You'd have your own room on the 2nd floor. The ranch hands are good men, but I keep them away from the house for the most part. You'd be safe here, Miss Mitchell, but you'd earn your keep. $30 a month. It wasn't much, but with room and board included, Sarah could save almost all of it. In a year, she could have enough money to go somewhere else, to start a business or buy a small house, and she would have a safe place to have her baby. There's something you should know, Sarah heard herself say. The words came out before she could stop them, driven by a need for honesty that surprised her. She couldn't start this new life built on a complete lie. Henderson waited, his expression unreadable. Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. I'm carrying another man's child, she said plainly, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. I'm about 3 months along. The father, he's not a good man, and he won't be part of this baby's life. But if you hire me, in about 6 months I'll need time to have the baby. I understand if that changes your mind. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah kept her eyes down, waiting for the condemnation, the rejection. She had been a fool, to be honest. She should have hidden it as long as possible, saved as much money as she could before the truth came out. Look at me, Henderson said quietly. Sarah raised her eyes. His expression was serious but not angry, not disgusted. The father, Henderson said. Is he going to come looking for you? No, Sarah said firmly. He doesn't know where I went. And even if he did, he wouldn't want the shame of acknowledging a child born out of wedlock. His reputation means more to him than anything else. Henderson nodded slowly. And you want to keep this baby? Raise it? Yes. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly. This child is innocent. Whatever the circumstances of its conception, it deserves a chance at life. I agree, Henderson said, surprising her. He leaned back in his chair. Here's what I think, Miss Mitchell. Everyone deserves a second chance, a fresh start. God knows I've needed plenty of them in my life. The work I'm offering still needs doing, pregnant or not. And my children need a woman's presence in their lives. They need to see kindness and strength. Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes. I mean the job is yours if you want it, Henderson said. We'll figure out the rest as we go. When the baby comes, we'll manage. Lucy is old enough to help more around the house, and the ranch hands can fend for themselves for a while if needed. I meant what I said about wanting someone who will stay. A woman with a baby to care for isn't likely to run off on a whim. Thank you, Sarah whispered. You don't know what this means. I have some idea, Henderson replied. Now, let me show you to your room and introduce you properly to the children. Tomorrow will be soon enough to start with the work. The evening passed in a blur of activity. Sarah met the ranch hands at dinner, 8 men of varying ages who treated her with respectful courtesy. James Corrigan was among them, and he gave her an encouraging smile when she entered the dining room. After dinner, Henderson showed Sarah around the house, explaining the daily routines. Lucy watched everything with serious eyes. clearly sizing up this newcomer who would be taking her late mother's place in running the household. When the children were finally in bed, Sarah retreated to her room. It was simple but clean, with a real bed, a washstand, a small wardrobe, and even a rocking chair by the window. She sat in the chair and looked out over the darkening landscape, still hardly believing her luck. A soft knock on the door startled her. "Come in," she called. James Corrigan stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Just wanted to check that you got settled all right." "Yes, thank you," Sarah said, "and thank you for bringing me here, for believing I was worth the chance." James stepped into the room, though he stayed near the door, proper and respectful. "Henderson is a good man, fair. He'll treat you right." "He knows," Sarah said suddenly, "about my condition. I told him." James's eyebrows rose. "That was brave." "It was necessary," Sarah corrected. "I couldn't build a new life on lies." "How did he take it?" "He still gave me the job," Sarah said, and she couldn't keep the wonder out of her voice. "He said everyone deserves a second chance." James smiled. "That sounds like Henderson." He turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Mitchell, I hope you don't think I'm speaking out of turn, but I'm glad you ended up here. I think you're going to do just fine." After he left, Sarah prepared for bed, her mind whirling. She had been so certain that her life was ruined, that carrying this child meant she would be condemned to shame and poverty. But here, in this wild place so far from everything she had known, she had found unexpected kindness. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the slight swell that would soon be impossible to hide. "We're going to be all right," she whispered to the life growing inside her. "We're going to make it." The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah rose before dawn to start breakfast for the household, making enormous quantities of eggs, bacon, and biscuits for the hungry ranch hands. After breakfast, she would tackle the endless cycle of cleaning, washing, and mending, while Lucy attended to her lessons at the kitchen table. Tommy and Ethan were supposed to be studying too, but they had a gift for disappearing whenever chores or schoolwork loomed. Henderson was a quiet presence, kind, but distant. He worked long hours managing the ranch, often riding out before sunrise and not returning until after dark. When he was home, he was patient with his children, but clearly uncomfortable with the domestic realm. He left household decisions entirely to Sarah, which she appreciated. The ranch hands, too, kept a respectful distance for the most part. They were polite at meals and tipped their hats when they saw her, but they had their own world in the bunkhouse and on the range, except for James Corrigan. James had a knack for appearing wherever Sarah was working. If she was hanging laundry, he would wander by to check on a fence that didn't need checking. If she was in the garden picking vegetables, he would suddenly remember that Henderson needed to know something that could only be discussed at length right there by the tomato plants. Sarah found herself looking forward to these encounters. James had an easy way about him, a genuine warmth that made her feel comfortable. He would tell her stories about the ranch, about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about his dreams of someday having his own spread. He made her laugh, something she hadn't done in months. One afternoon in late August, Sarah was struggling to move a heavy pot of stew when James appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Let me help with that," he said, crossing the room in 3 long strides. He lifted the pot easily, moving it to the stove. "You shouldn't be hauling heavy things around in your condition." Sarah bristled slightly. "I'm pregnant, not broken." "Didn't say you were," James replied mildly, "but there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered." He was right, and Sarah knew it. Her pride had been wounded by so much in recent months that she sometimes pushed back against kindness without meaning to. "Thank you," she said more gently. "I appreciate it." James lingered, leaning against the counter. "How are you feeling? I mean, with the baby and everything." It was a surprisingly intimate question, but coming from James, it didn't feel inappropriate. "Tired," Sarah admitted, "and my back aches constantly, but overall I'm doing well, better than I expected." "You're showing more," James observed, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that was probably rude to mention." Sarah glanced down at her dress. She had let out the seams as much as she could, but her expanding belly was becoming increasingly obvious. It's all right, it's the truth. I expect before long the whole ranch will know if they don't already. They know, James said. Henderson told them when you first arrived. Said any man who treated you with disrespect would be out on his ear before sundown. Nobody's going to bother you, Sarah. The use of her first name sent a little thrill through her. They had been dancing around formality for weeks, but this felt like a shift into something more familiar, more personal. And what do they think? Sarah asked. The men. Do they gossip about the fallen woman in the main house? They think you're the best cook they've had in years, James said firmly. And they respect the fact that you work hard and don't complain. That's what matters out here. Not where you came from or what happened before, just who you are now. Sarah felt tears threatening again. Pregnancy was making her emotional. But beyond that, she wasn't used to such straightforward acceptance. Why are you so kind to me, James? Really? He was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes serious. Honestly, at first it was just about helping someone in need. But now? He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Now I admire you. What you're doing, the courage it takes to face this situation alone. And I enjoy your company. Is that all right to say? Yes, Sarah whispered. It's all right. They stood looking at each other across the kitchen, and Sarah felt something shift between them. An acknowledgement of feelings neither of them had voiced until now. The moment was broken by the sound of the children thundering in from outside, demanding cookies and asking when dinner would be ready. As summer gave way to fall, Sarah's feelings for James deepened. She found herself thinking about him constantly, looking for excuses to be where he might be. When he smiled at her across the dinner table, her heart would skip. When his hand accidentally brushed hers as he passed her a dish, she felt heat spread through her whole body. It was wrong, she told herself. She was pregnant with another man's child, had no business developing feelings for anyone. But her heart didn't seem to care about logic. James, for his part, seemed equally drawn to her. He started taking his meals later than the other hands so they could talk after the children were in bed. He would sit at the kitchen table while she cleaned up from dinner, telling her about his day or asking about hers. Sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, and those moments felt as intimate as any conversation. One evening in mid-September, Henderson asked to speak with Sarah privately. They sat in his office, a small room off the main hall filled with ledgers and ranch business. Sarah, I wanted to check how you're managing, Henderson began. You're about 6 months along now, if I'm calculating right. Are you feeling well enough to continue with the work? Yes, Sarah assured him. I'm more tired than I used to be, but I can still manage everything that needs doing. Henderson nodded. Lucy has mentioned that you've been teaching her more in the kitchen. I appreciate that. She needs to learn these skills, and you're patient with her in a way I never could be. She's a good girl, Sarah said. All your children are. You've raised them well. Their mother did most of that, Henderson said quietly. I've just been trying not to ruin what she started. He cleared his throat. There's something else I wanted to mention. I've noticed James Corrigan spending considerable time around the house, around you. Sarah felt her face flush. He's been helpful. Nothing inappropriate has happened, I promise. I'm not accusing anyone of impropriety, Henderson said. James is a good man, one of the best workers I've ever had. Honest, hard-working, loyal. But Sarah, you need to be careful. You're in a vulnerable position, and I don't want to see you hurt. I understand, Sarah said softly. Henderson studied her for a moment. Do you have feelings for him? The direct question caught Sarah off guard. She could lie, but what was the point? Yes, she admitted. I do. But I haven't encouraged him. I know my situation is complicated. It is complicated, Henderson agreed, but feelings don't follow logic. Just be careful, Sarah, for both your sakes. That conversation weighed on Sarah's mind for days afterward. She tried to pull back from James to be more formal, to discourage the intimacy that had been growing between them. But it was like trying to hold back the tide. Every time she resolved to keep her distance, he would do something kind or say something that made her laugh, and her resolve would crumble. The first snow came in early October, dusting the hills with white. Sarah stood on the back porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching the flakes fall. Her belly was prominent now, making it hard to move comfortably. The baby kicked frequently, reminding her of the reality she couldn't escape. "Beautiful, isn't it?" James's voice came from behind her. He joined her on the porch, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. First snow always feels magical. "It's cold," Sarah said, but she was smiling. Back in Philadelphia, snow meant being trapped inside for days, everything shutting down. Here it feels different somehow. "Out here, life doesn't stop for weather," James said. "You just adapt." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sarah, there's something I've been wanting to say to you. Can we talk? Really talk?" Sarah's heart began to race. "Of course." James took a deep breath. "I know this might not be the right time. I know your situation is complicated, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. Sarah, I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the cold air between them. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "James, I'm carrying another man's child," she said, echoing the same words she had spoken to Henderson months ago. "I know," James said quietly. He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense and sincere. "Then I'll raise it as my own." Sarah stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You can't mean that. You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," James replied. "I've thought about nothing else for weeks. Sarah, what happened to you before you came here? That's not your fault. You're one of the strongest, most courageous women I've ever met. The fact that you're going to have a baby doesn't change how I feel about you. If anything, it makes me admire you more." "But raising another man's child," Sarah protested, even as hope bloomed painfully in her chest. "People would talk. They would judge you." "Let them talk," James said. "I don't care what people think. I care about you. I care about building a life with you if you'll have me." "This is crazy," Sarah whispered. "We've only known each other a few months." "I knew the first day I met you on that platform in Deadwood," James said. "When you were swaying on your feet but still trying to stand tall, I knew then that you were someone special, and every day since has just confirmed it." Sarah wanted to say yes. She wanted to throw herself into his arms and accept his incredible offer, but doubt held her back. "What if you change your mind? What if after the baby comes you realize you can't do this? I can't risk my child's security on feelings that might not last." James reached out and gently took her hand. "I'm not going to change my mind. I'm not that kind of man. When I commit to something, I see it through. And I'm committing to you, Sarah, to you and your baby, if you'll let me." "Why?" Sarah asked, needing to understand. "Why would you take this on?" James was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "My father died when I was 12, he finally said, "kicked by a horse. Left my mother with 5 kids and a farm that was barely scraping by. My uncle could have turned us out, but instead he took us all in, raised us like we were his own children. He didn't have to do that. He chose to. And he taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, about commitment, about showing up every day and doing the work of loving people." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm choosing you, Sarah. I'm choosing this baby that you're carrying. I know it won't be easy. I know there will be hard days and people who don't understand. But I also know that I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to teach your child to ride a horse and read and be kind. I want all of it." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I tried not to. I told myself it was impossible, that I had no right to these feelings, but I can't help it, James. When I'm with you, I feel safe. I feel seen. I feel like maybe I can actually have the life I dreamed about." James pulled her into his arms, careful of her swollen belly, and held her close. Sarah rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. For the first time since that terrible night in Philadelphia, she felt like she might actually be able to heal. "Will you marry me?" James asked softly. I know it's fast, and I know you might want to wait, but I want to make this official. I want everyone to know that you're mine and I'm yours and that this baby will have my name." "Yes," Sarah said, lifting her face to his. "Yes, I'll marry you." James bent his head and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Snowflakes fell around them, catching in Sarah's hair and on James's shoulders, blessing this moment of commitment and hope. They told Henderson that evening. He looked at them both for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his weathered face. "I was wondering how long it would take you two to figure it out," he said. "Congratulations. When's the wedding?" "Soon," James said. "Before the baby comes, if possible. I want to do this right." "There's a circuit preacher who comes through about once a month," Henderson said. "He's due in 2 weeks. That soon enough?" 2 weeks. Sarah's head spun at the speed of it all. But looking at James, seeing the love and certainty in his eyes, she knew she didn't need more time. "That's perfect," she said. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Word of the upcoming wedding spread through the ranch and into Deadwood. Sarah was touched by the kindness of the community. Ranch hands offered to build furniture for the small cabin James was preparing for them to live in after the wedding. Women from nearby ranches appeared with gifts, baby clothes and blankets and advice. Lucy threw herself into helping with wedding preparations with an enthusiasm that surprised Sarah. The girl had been reserved at first, but over the months she had warmed up and now she was excited about the wedding. "Can I be your attendant?" Lucy asked one afternoon as they worked together on Sarah's dress. It was a simple blue gown, practical but pretty, made over from fabric Sarah had brought from Philadelphia. "I would love that," Sarah said, smiling at the girl's eager face. "And maybe you could help me with my hair?" Lucy beamed. "I'll practice every day until I get it perfect." Tommy and Ethan were less interested in the wedding details, but they seemed pleased by the idea of James becoming more permanently part of their household. They already treated him like an uncle, and now they would see him every day. The evening before the wedding, Henderson asked to speak with both Sarah and James. They met in his office, curious about what he wanted to say. "I know you've been preparing the old line cabin for after the wedding," Henderson began, addressing James. "It's a good, solid structure, but it's small. Too small for a growing family." "It'll do for now," James said. "Eventually, I hope to build something bigger." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Henderson said. He pulled out a map of the ranch property and spread it on his desk. "This section here, about 100 acres along the creek. It's good land, flat and fertile with water year-round. I'd like to deed it to you as a wedding gift." James stared at him. "Henderson, I can't accept that. That land is worth more than I could earn in years." "You've earned it," Henderson said firmly. "You've been with me since I started building this place. You're loyal, hardworking, and honest. And more than that, you're family. You've been like a brother to me, especially after Margaret died. I want to do this." "It's too much," James protested, but his voice was thick with emotion. "It's not enough," Henderson countered. "You'll still work for the ranch, I hope. But this way, you'll have something of your own. You can build a real home for your wife and your child. You can start building your own herd. It's what you've always wanted." Sarah saw tears in James's eyes. He stood and offered his hand to Henderson, then pulled him into a rough embrace. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "You don't know what this means." "I know exactly what it means," Henderson said, returning the embrace. "It means you're going to have the life you deserve." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the November sun sparkling on frost-covered grass. Sarah woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. Lucy appeared with breakfast and helped her dress, fussing over every detail. "You look beautiful," Lucy said when Sarah was finally ready. "James is going to cry when he sees you." "I might cry too," Sarah admitted, touching her belly. The baby was active this morning, perhaps sensing its mother's excitement. The ceremony was held in the main room of the ranch house, which had been decorated with pine branches and late-season flowers. Ranch hands crowded in, dressed in their best clothes, faces scrubbed and hair neatly combed. A few families from neighboring ranches had come as well, and the room was warm with people and good wishes. The circuit preacher was an elderly man with kind eyes and a booming voice. He stood before the fireplace, his Bible open in his hands, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Then James entered from the side door, and Sarah's breath caught. He wore a new suit, probably his first, and his hair was neatly trimmed, but it was his expression that made her heart swell. He looked at her with such love, such open adoration, that she felt beautiful, despite her swollen belly and simple dress. Henderson walked Sarah to James's side, giving her hand to the cowboy with a solemn nod. Then he stepped back to stand with his children, who were watching with wide, excited eyes. The preacher began the ceremony, his words rolling through the quiet room. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Sarah barely heard the traditional words. She was focused entirely on James, on the way he looked at her, on the strength of his hand holding hers. When the preacher asked if they had their own vows, James cleared his throat. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his face. "When I met you on that platform in Deadwood, you were alone and scared but still standing. That's who you are. You're strong and brave and good. I promise to love you every day of my life. I promise to protect you and honor you, and I promise to be a father to your child, to love that baby as my own, to raise them with kindness and teach them to be strong like their mother. You're my family now, and I'll never let you face anything alone again." Sarah was crying openly now. She took a shaky breath. "James, you saved my life. Maybe not literally, but you gave me hope when I had none. You saw me when I felt invisible. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. I promise to love you with everything I have. I promise to build a life with you, to face whatever comes together. You're the best man I've ever known, and I'm so grateful that I get to spend my life with you." The preacher smiled. "By the power vested in me by God and the Dakota Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. James, you may kiss your bride." James cupped Sarah's face gently and kissed her, tender and sweet, while the assembled crowd cheered and applauded. When they broke apart, both smiling through tears, Sarah felt a joy so complete it seemed impossible. The rest of the day passed in a happy blur. There was a feast, the tables groaning under the weight of contributed dishes. There was music, one of the ranch hands producing a fiddle and playing lively tunes that had people dancing despite the cold. There was laughter and toasts and so much warmth that Sarah felt surrounded by love. As the sun began to set, James and Sarah slipped away to the cabin that would be their temporary home until they could build on their new land. It was indeed small, just one room with a bed, a stove, a table, and a few chairs, but it was clean and cozy, and it was theirs. James built up the fire while Sarah sat in the rocking chair someone had contributed. She was exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "How are you feeling?" James asked, coming to kneel beside her chair. "And how's the baby?" "We're both good," Sarah said, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. Right on cue, the baby kicked, and James's face lit up with wonder. "Hello in there," he said softly, speaking to Sarah's belly. "I'm your papa. Well, I'm going to be. I'm going to do my best by you, little one. I promise." Sarah felt tears threatening again. She seemed to cry at everything these days. "You're going to be a wonderful father." "I'm going to try," James said. He looked up at her. "Sarah, I know we've moved fast. I know there's still a lot we don't know about each other, but I want you to know that I meant every word I said today. You're my wife, and that baby is my child, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you both know you're loved." "I know," Sarah said, running her fingers through his hair. "I believe you, James. For the first time in so long, I believe in happy endings again." They sat together in the firelight, talking quietly about their future. James described the house he wanted to build on their new land, with big windows to let in light and a porch where they could sit in the evenings. Sarah talked about planting a garden in the spring, about teaching their child to read. They made plans and dreamed dreams, two people who had found each other against all odds. That night, lying in James's arms in the narrow bed, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. If someone had told her 6 months ago that she would be married to a cowboy in Dakota Territory, happy and hopeful and in love, she would have thought them crazy. But life had a way of surprising you. She thought about Charles Whitmore, the man who had violated her trust and her body. She felt no hatred for him anymore, just a distant pity. He would never know the kind of love she had found with James. He would never understand what it meant to choose love over convenience, to build something real instead of settling for society's expectations. And she thought about the baby growing inside her. This child had been conceived in violence and fear, but it would be born into love and safety. That made all the difference. "What are you thinking about?" James murmured in the darkness. "How lucky I am," Sarah replied. "How grateful." "I'm the lucky one," James said, tightening his arms around her. "Now get some sleep. You need your rest." The winter months that followed were hard in some ways and wonderful in others. The weather turned brutal, with snowstorms that lasted for days and temperatures that made going outside dangerous. Sarah's pregnancy advanced, her belly growing enormous, making simple tasks difficult. But inside their small cabin, she and James created a world of warmth and love. James continued working for Henderson, though he spent every spare moment at home with Sarah. He would come in from the cold, stamping snow off his boots, and immediately go to her, asking how she felt, if the baby had kicked, if she needed anything. He treated her like she was precious, and Sarah bloomed under his care. Henderson was generous about giving James time off as Sarah's due date approached. In early February, when Sarah went into labor, James was right there beside her. He held her hand through the long hours of pain, wiped her face with cool cloths, encouraged her when she wanted to give up. The baby was born just before dawn, a tiny boy with a shock of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. The midwife from a neighboring ranch cleaned him up and placed him in Sarah's arms, and Sarah looked down at her son with overwhelming love. "He's perfect," she whispered. James sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the baby with wonder. "Can I hold him?" Sarah passed the baby to James carefully. The cowboy cradled the tiny infant with surprising gentleness, his large work-roughened hands supporting the small head. "Hello, son," James said softly. "Welcome to the world." "We should name him," Sarah said. "What do you think of Jacob? Jacob James?" James looked up at her, his eyes bright with tears. "You want to give him my name?" "You're his father," Sarah said simply, "in every way that matters." James bent his head over the baby, and Sarah saw tears fall onto the blanket. "Jacob James Corrigan," he said. "It's perfect." The weeks after Jacob's birth were exhausting and wonderful. Sarah was amazed by how much one tiny human could demand. Jacob needed to eat constantly, cried for reasons Sarah couldn't always decipher, and slept in short, unpredictable bursts. But James was there for all of it, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with a fussy baby at 2 a.m, marveling over every small milestone. "Look," he smiled, James would announce with the excitement of someone who had discovered gold. "Sarah, he really smiled at me." "That's probably gas," Sarah would reply, but she was smiling too, charmed by her husband's complete devotion to their son. Henderson and his children were frequent visitors once the weather improved. Lucy was particularly smitten with baby Jacob, begging to hold him and help with his care. Tommy and Ethan were less interested in the baby itself, but excited about the idea that Jacob would eventually be big enough to play with. As winter gave way to spring, James began working on their new house in every spare moment. He enlisted help from other ranch hands, and the building rose quickly, a sturdy 2-story structure with the big windows James had promised. By the time Jacob was 4 months old, the house was ready for them to move in. Sarah stood in the empty main room of their new home, Jacob in her arms, and looked around in wonder. There was a large kitchen with a good stove, a dining area with space for a big table, a a parlor with a fireplace. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms, one for them, one for Jacob, and one for future children. "It's beautiful," she told James, who was watching her nervously. "It's more than I ever dreamed of." James relaxed, smiling. "It's ours. Everything we build here, it's ours. Our family, our land, our life." They moved in the next week, and Sarah threw herself into making the house a home. She sewed curtains and made quilts. She planted a garden with vegetables and herbs. She arranged their simple furniture to make the most of the space. And every evening when James came home from working the ranch, she would meet him at the door with Jacob in her arms, and they would eat dinner together as a family. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. James worked hard building their small herd of cattle on their 100 acres while still helping Henderson manage the larger ranch. Sarah managed the household and cared for Jacob, who was growing fast, becoming more alert and interactive every day. They went to church on Sundays when weather permitted, becoming part of the broader community. Not everyone was accepting. Some of the townspeople in Deadwood whispered about Sarah's past, about the baby who had been born just 7 months after she arrived in the territory, but enough people knew the truth of their story, and enough people admired James, that they were mostly welcomed. One afternoon in late summer, nearly a year after their wedding, Sarah was working in her garden when she heard a horse approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes, and saw an unfamiliar figure riding up the path to their house. As the rider got closer, Sarah's blood ran cold. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But it was. Charles Whitmore sat astride an expensive horse, looking completely out of place in his fine Eastern clothes. He reined in near the garden fence and looked down at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Hello, Sarah," he said. Sarah's hands clenched around the hoe she had been using. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you," Charles said, dismounting. "Your parents finally admitted where you had gone. It took some time to track you down out here in the middle of nowhere." "You shouldn't have bothered," Sarah said coldly. "I have nothing to say to you." Charles's eyes moved over her, taking in her simple dress, her sun-browned skin, her work-roughened hands. "You've changed. This life has made you hard." "This life has made me free," Sarah corrected. "Now leave. You're not welcome here." "I heard you had a child," Charles said, ignoring her request. "My child, I have a right to see him." "You have no rights," Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage. "You lost any claim to rights when you forced yourself on me. That baby is not yours. He has a father, a real father who loves him and cares for him. You're nothing to us." Charles's face darkened. "Be reasonable. Sarah, I'm willing to overlook your foolish flight out here. I'm willing to take you back, to raise the child as legitimate. Your reputation can be salvaged if you come home now and we marry as we were supposed to." "I am married," Sarah said, holding up her left hand to show the simple gold band James had placed there. "To a good man, a man nothing like you. I wouldn't come back to Philadelphia if it was the last place on earth." Before Charles could respond, James appeared from around the side of the house, clearly alerted by the sound of voices. He took in the scene instantly, his eyes moving from Sarah's distressed face to the stranger on their property. "Is there a problem here?" James asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "Who are you?" Charles demanded. "I'm her husband," James said, moving to stand beside Sarah. "And you're on my property. I'd like to know why." Charles looked James up and down with barely concealed contempt. "So this is what you chose. A cowboy. How far you've fallen, Sarah." "I didn't fall," Sarah said firmly, taking James's hand. "I rose. I found a life worth living and a man worth loving. You need to leave, Charles. Now." "That child is mine," Charles insisted. "I have legal rights." "You have nothing," James said, his voice hard. "Jacob is my son. I was there when he was born. I'm the one who walks the floor with him at night and teaches him to smile. I'm his father in every way that matters. You're just a man who hurt his mother. And if you don't leave right now, I'm going to make you leave." Charles looked at James, clearly assessing whether the cowboy would actually follow through on the threat. Whatever he saw in James's face must have convinced him because he took a step back toward his horse. "You'll regret this, Sarah," Charles said. "Both of you will." "The only thing I regret is wasting time on you," Sarah replied. "Goodbye, Charles." They stood together, hands clasped, and watched Charles ride away. Sarah was trembling, and James pulled her into his arms. "He can't take Jacob, can he?" Sarah asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Legally, I mean?" "No," James said firmly. "Jacob has my name. I'm his legal father. And even if it came to a court, no judge out here is going to side with some Eastern dandy over a man who's been raising the boy as his own. Don't worry, Sarah. I meant what I said. He's my son, and I'll protect him." That evening, after Jacob was asleep in his cradle, James and Sarah sat on their porch watching the sun set over the hills. Sarah was still shaken by Charles's appearance, but she also felt a strange sense of closure. She had faced her past and sent it away. This life she had built with James. This was real and solid in a way her old life never had been. "Are you all right?" James asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I am," Sarah said, and she meant it. "Seeing him again just reminded me of how far I've come, how much better my life is now." "Did you ever love him?" James asked, "before everything happened?" Sarah considered the question. "I thought I did, but I didn't really know what love was. I thought it was about flowers and pretty words and social status. I didn't understand that real love is about showing up every day. It's about holding someone's hand through the hard times. It's about choosing each other over and over again." "Like we do," James said softly. "Like we do," Sarah agreed, turning to kiss him. "I love you, James Corrigan. Thank you for giving me this life." "Thank you for choosing me," James replied, "for trusting me with you and with Jacob. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible." They sat together as darkness fell. Two people who had found each other through hardship and chosen to build something beautiful together. The years that followed were full of hard work, joy, and growth. Their small ranch prospered. James proved to have a gift for breeding horses, and word spread about the quality of the animals from the Corrigan place. They built a barn and expanded their house as their family grew. When Jacob was 2, Sarah gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Grace, who looked just like their father with bright blue eyes and ready smiles. James was terrified of handling 2 babies at once, but he quickly became an expert, able to soothe one while feeding the other. 2 years after the twins came another boy, Henry, named after James's father. And 3 years after that, a final daughter, Rose, completed their family. The house that had seemed so large when they first moved in became a bustling, chaotic, wonderful place filled with children's laughter and the daily rhythms of family life. Sarah, who had once thought her life was ruined, found joy in the ordinary moments, teaching her daughters to bake, watching James teach the boys to ride, gathering everyone around the table for meals. Jacob grew into a strong, kind boy who adored his younger siblings and worshipped his father. He never asked about his biological father, and Sarah never volunteered the information. As far as Jacob was concerned, James Corrigan was his papa, the man who taught him everything important, who was always there when he needed him. Henderson remained a close friend and neighbor. His children grew up alongside the Corrigan children, and the two families celebrated holidays and milestones together. Lucy married one of the other ranch hands when she turned 19, and Sarah stood up with her at the wedding, proud of the young woman she had become. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James surprised Sarah with a trip into Deadwood, arranging for Henderson's new wife to watch the children for the night. They stayed at the same hotel where James had first bought Sarah a meal, and they laughed about how much had changed since that day. "Do you ever miss Philadelphia?" James asked as they walked through the town. "The culture, the society?" "Never," Sarah said honestly. "I love our life. I love our children. I love you. This is where I'm meant to be." They stopped at the platform where they had first met, now bustling with people coming and going. "I stood right here," Sarah said, pointing. "I was so scared, so alone. I thought my life was over." "And I stood there," James said, indicating a spot a few feet away. "I saw a beautiful woman who looked like she needed help, and I thought, maybe I can make a difference. You made all the difference, Sarah said, turning to face him. You saved me, James. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. We saved each other, James corrected, pulling her close. I was just drifting before I met you, working hard, but not really building toward anything. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to dream bigger. They kissed there on the platform, not caring who might see. Two people still deeply in love after a decade of marriage and 5 children and all the challenges that life had thrown at them. As they walked back to the hotel, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had left Philadelphia carrying another man's child, convinced that her life was ruined, that she would always be defined by what had been done to her. But she had been wrong. She had found James, a man who saw her not as damaged or fallen, but as strong and worthy of love. He had chosen her and her unborn child, had built a life with her that was rich and full and happy. The child born of violence and fear had been raised in love and safety, surrounded by siblings and parents who adored him. And Sarah had healed, had become someone she could be proud of. A good mother, a loving wife, a valued member of her community. Years later, when Sarah was in her 60s and James's hair had gone completely white, they would sit on the porch of their home surrounded by grandchildren and tell the story of how they met. The children would listen with wide eyes to the tale of a brave woman who came west alone and a cowboy who chose to love her and her child. "But didn't you care that Grandma was going to have a baby?" one of the grandchildren would inevitably ask James. And James would smile and say the same thing every time. "I cared that she needed help, and I was glad I could give it. Your grandma is the bravest person I've ever met, and that baby she was carrying, your Uncle Jacob, became my first son." Love isn't just about feelings, it's about choices. And I chose your grandma, and I've never regretted it for a single day. Sarah would squeeze his hand, and they would exchange a look that spoke of decades of love and partnership and the kind of deep understanding that only comes from building a life together through good times and hard times. Jacob, grown into a man with children of his own, would often join these storytelling sessions. He knew the truth about his parentage. Sarah and James had told him when he turned 18, wanting him to hear it from them rather than through gossip. But knowing the truth hadn't changed anything for Jacob. James was his father in every way that mattered, and Sarah was the strongest woman he knew. The Corrigan Ranch continued to thrive for generations. The land that Henderson had deeded to James as a wedding gift became a prosperous operation, passed down to Jacob and then to his children. The house that James built for Sarah sheltered 3 generations of Corrigans, each adding their own memories and traditions to its walls. Sarah lived to be 78. Active and engaged until the very end. She saw all her children married, met dozens of grandchildren, and even held a few great-grandchildren in her arms. When she passed peacefully in her sleep one autumn night, James was beside her, holding her hand just as he had through every important moment of their life together. James followed her just 6 months later, his heart unable to bear being without his beloved wife. They were buried side by side on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a sky so big and blue it seemed to go on forever. At the funeral, Jacob stood with his siblings and their children and grandchildren, a family that had grown from one woman's courage and one man's choice to love unconditionally. He spoke about his parents, about the legacy they had left behind that went far beyond land or money. "They taught us that family is built on love and choice," Jacob said, his voice strong despite his grief. "They showed us that where you come from doesn't matter as much as where you're going. And they proved that the greatest adventures come from opening your heart to someone who needs you." As the sun set over the black hills of South Dakota, casting golden light over the land the Corrigans had made their own, the family gathered together, united by the love story that had started on a dusty platform in Deadwood so many years before. It was a story about second chances, about courage in the face of hardship, about a cowboy who said, "Then I'll raise it as my own," and meant it with his whole heart. It was a love story for the ages. Born in the wild, beautiful, unforgiving landscape of the American West, where two people who had every reason to give up instead chose to build something lasting and true. And in the end, that choice made all the difference, creating a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come, a testament to the transformative power of choosing love over fear, compassion over judgment, and hope over despair.